Imagine going from bus rides in the juniors and 4 tough years of university hockey to one of the wildest Cinderella stories the NHL has ever seen. In 2015, Andrew Hammond, an undrafted goalie barely hanging on in the minors, suddenly turned into the Hamburglar, rattling off a 24-game stretch that dragged the Ottawa Senators from a 14-point hole into the playoffs. Hamburgers flew from the stands, and a legend was born. This is the unbelievable story of the goalie who came out of nowhere and for 2 months lit the hockey world on fire. Let's dive in. Andrew Hammond's journey to the NHL was anything but easy. His path wound through small-town rinks, long junior bus rides, 4 hard seasons at Bowling Green State University, and a stretch in the American Hockey League where his numbers offered little reason to believe a breakthrough was coming. Yet in February 2015, everything shifted. Out of nowhere, Hammond sparked one of the most remarkable goaltending runs the league had ever seen, lifting the Ottawa Senators from a daunting 14-point deficit in the standings into the playoffs, with a 24-game stretch that still looks surreal on paper. By the time the ride ended, Ottawa had a new folk hero. Hamburgers rained down from the stands, and the undrafted goalie, once dismissed as ordinary, had authored a story that still feels almost impossible. Hammond's rise was slow and unglamorous. The story of a late bloomer who never seemed destined to be an NHL starter. With the Vermin Vipers of the BCHL in 2007-08, his .899 save percentage and .319 goals against average over 41 games was solid, but not spectacular. A year later, though, his game began to sharpen. Across 43 games for the Vipers, he posted a .230 goals against average, a .912 save percentage, and 5 shutouts, numbers that suggested he was making strides in the crease. That spring, Hammond backstopped Vernon all the way through the National Junior A Championship, sealing it with a 2-0 shutout in the 2009 RBC Cup Final. Performances like that live on in small-town memory, and more importantly, they give a young goalie the rare, intoxicating belief that on the biggest stage, he can be the deciding factor. After his success in Vernon, Hammond moved on to Bowling Green, where his development took on a different shape. Wins were hard to come by, but what he gained was resilience. Over 4 seasons with Bowling Green, he became accustomed to constant pressure, often facing relentless shot totals that left him carrying the team's fate on his shoulders. As a junior, he started 44 games and posted a .273 goals against average to go along with a .903 save percentage. As a senior, he steadied himself with a .917 save percentage and a .247 goals against average across 29 games. He finished his full college career having played 119 games with a .285 GAA and a .906 save percentage. Twice, Bowling Green named him Team MVP, a distinction that reflected how vital he was to the group and spoke more to his value than raw numbers ever could. Though undrafted, Hammond's determination didn't waver. In March 2013, he signed with the Ottawa Senators and joined their AHL affiliate in Binghamton. His first full season in 2013-14 was solid. Hammond played in 48 games and posted a .281 goals against average, a .910 save percentage, and 25 wins. It was the resume of a professional goaltender holding his ground, not a hint of the folk hero he would become. The next year began on a harsher note. In 25 appearances for Binghamton, in 2014-15, his play dipped to a .351 goals against average and an .898 save percentage, numbers that typically close doors rather than open them. At that point, nothing about Hammond's stat line suggested that a once-in-a-lifetime story was about to unfold. The NHL has a way of writing its own stories, and in the winter of 2015, Andrew Hammond suddenly found himself at the center of one. Ottawa's season had been spiraling for months. A coaching change in December hadn't sparked much life, and by mid-February, the Senators were 14 points back of a playoff berth, the sort of gap that usually signals the end of meaningful hockey. When injuries sidelined both Craig Anderson and Robin Lehner, the call went out to Binghamton. Hammond was summoned on February 18, 2015, and from that night on, nothing in Ottawa looked the same. In his first NHL start against the Montreal Canadiens, he stopped 42 of 44 shots in a 4-2 win. Within days, he was doing more than just holding the fort. A 3-0 shutout of the Anaheim Ducks was quickly followed by another the very next night against the LA Kings. The kind of back-to-back statement that announced something unusual was underway. From the outset, there was an undeniable air of magic about his play. What unfolded over his next 24 games was the sort of stretch that bends both statistics and memory. The imagery endures vividly. The Hamburglar mask, the nickname, and fans showering the ice with hamburgers in celebration. But the numbers are even more astonishing. Hammond went 21-2 with a 179 goals against average, a 941 save percentage, and 3 shutouts to close the regular season. In March alone, he went 10-1-1, earning NHL First Star honors for the month. Official recognition from the league that his improbable streak wasn't just a charming story. It was rewriting Ottawa's season in real time. To really appreciate how outrageous Hammond's numbers were, you need to stack them against the backdrop of the league. In 2014-15, the average NHL save percentage was .915, already a solid benchmark in the so-called analytics era. Carey Price, who was at the height of his powers and would sweep the Hart and Vezina Trophy that season, finished with a .933 save percentage and a 196 GAA over 66 games. Numbers considered elite even by modern standards. Hammond, over his 24-game heater, outpaced even that by 8 points with a .941 save percentage. His 179 goals against average during that run came in a season where teams were scoring 2.66 goals per game. What made it even more remarkable was the historical oddity threaded through it all. In his first 12 NHL starts, Hammond allowed 2 goals or fewer every time, tying a mark set by Hall of Famer Frank Brimsek back in 1938-39. He also secured at least a point for Ottawa in each of his first 15 starts, going 14-0-1 in that span. Those are the sorts of numbers that don't just raise eyebrows, they make you question whether you're looking at a glitch. Beyond the novelty, though, they served as a reminder of hockey's occasional unpredictability, how the sport sometimes bends toward one player and lets him shine with a streak that seems immune to logic. For that stretch, Hammond wasn't just stopping pucks, he was warping the very framework of what seemed possible. Hammond's streak, when broken down game by game, reads less like a stat sheet and more like a journey. The back-to-back shutouts in California against Anaheim and Los Angeles served as the announcement to the entire league. The kind of statement games that cut through skepticism because they unfolded on the West Coast. In the spotlight, where doubters tend to pay attention, they were the nights in New York, on Long Island, and at Madison Square Garden, where he kept the puck out as 2 of hockey's most iconic barns shook around him, even when reality seemed ready to intrude, like in a late March 5-1 loss against the Rangers. Hammond brushed it aside with a win immediately after, never allowing momentum to truly slip. By April, the run had swelled to its peak. Ottawa stacked win after win. Hammond blanked the Rangers at the Garden, and on the season's final night in Philadelphia, he clinched the line that would forever define his legend. 21-2, a 24-game burst that turned a middling season into a playoff berth. What makes it almost unbelievable is the contrast that frames it. Just weeks earlier, in Binghamton, Hammond had a .351 goals against average and an .898 save percentage, numbers that mark a goaltender as replacement depth rather than NHL savior. Ottawa's playoff hopes, meanwhile, had been buried under a 14-point deficit, the kind of gap teams never cross. Yet, from February 10th onward, the Senators closed with a staggering 23-4-4 record, becoming the first team in the modern NHL to erase a 14-point hole and qualify for the postseason. Hammond was the difference. He transformed the improbable into the possible, then the possible into the inevitable. To measure the absurdity, just place his .898 save percentage in the AHL beside his .941 save percentage in the NHL and compress it into 6 weeks. That is the distance Hammond traveled, dragging an entire franchise along with him. What grew around him was a shared conviction, teammates skating with extra confidence because they trusted the man in the crease, a coach willing to stick with the hot hand even as veterans healed, a fan base turning nervous tension into roaring energy. The Hamburglar mask, the burgers raining down from the seats, those weren't just quirks of a streak. They were the symbols of a city buying into a myth as it unfolded. Through it all, Hammond's composure seemed to steady the ice itself, making his teammates taller, sharper, braver. Yet, what makes the story endure is that it wasn't built to last. And that's exactly the point. The NHL thrives on razor-thin margins, and 24 games is long enough to be real, but short enough to defy replication. That doesn't cheapen Hammond's run, it sharpens it. If Carey Price's 2014-15 season was the measured dominance of a goaltender at the height of his craft, Hammond's 6-week blur was proof of hockey's streaky chaos, a lightning strike in borrowed hands. One was greatness sustained, the other a phenomenon that flickered and burned white hot. In Ottawa, during that spring, no one cared about the difference. Both felt like fate had leaned in their direction. When the playoffs began, the spell broke. Hammond started the opening 2 games against Montreal before Craig Anderson reclaimed the crease, and the Senators bowed out in 6 games. For some, that quick exit turned Hammond's run into a curious footnote, but in truth, it makes the story sharper. The line between missing the postseason by double digits and crashing the gate as a wild card is enormous. Ottawa's very identity in 2014-15, the stubborn team that refused to fade, that leaned on its goaltender as license to believe, was built entirely inside those 6 weeks. And if you ask the people who lived it, the memories haven't dulled. The win in his first start against the Canadiens, the California shutouts, the silence at Madison Square Garden, the Hamburgers raining from the stands. The playoff loss doesn't erase that glow, it frames it as the miracle it was. Hammond's own career after that was less glamorous, marked by the winding path of a journeyman goaltender, more years in the AHL, brief NHL cameos, even a return to Montreal late in his career. Eventually, he closed the playing chapter of his life, but not before returning to Ottawa for the 10th anniversary of his run. That ceremonial puck drop wasn't just about nostalgia, it felt like a thank you. The city offering back a measure of joy he'd given them. In a league where more than 1,000 games are played every season, and most fade instantly, Hammond managed to carve out a stretch that still burns bright a decade later. What remains when you strip away the Hamburglar mask, the burger tosses, and the chants is something quieter. A goaltender who convinced himself he could buy his team time, and then went out and did exactly that. His path had taught him pieces of that resilience along the way. Junior hockey taught him to win the big ones. College taught him how to survive the rough ones. And the AHL taught him how to keep showing up even when no one seemed to notice. In Ottawa, in 2015, he put it all together and simply stopped everything. The stat line itself reads like a dare. 24 games, 20 wins, 1 regulation loss, 2 overtime losses, a 179 goals against average, a 941 save percentage, 3 shutouts, and 12 consecutive starts of 2 goals or fewer. That was enough to drag a team across a 14-point canyon and plant them in the playoffs. It was absurd, unforgettable, and unexplainable beyond the numbers themselves. Ottawa called him up because they had run out of options. The city embraced him because, for 6 electric weeks, he made defeat feel impossible. And there you have it, the truly unbelievable story of Andrew Hammond, the goalie who came out of nowhere and for 2 months lit the hockey world on fire. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more videos.